Welcome. We are really excited to have you. I'm Ifrey Escott. I'm one of the co-chairs of the Women in Architecture Committee of Philadelphia. And I was the founder of the Dynamo user group for Philadelphia several years ago. I'm joined tonight by the current leader of the Dynamo user group, the Philadelphia Dynamo user group, Daniel Howard. This joint event is now in its 4th year. And we are thrilled to use it as a platform to highlight the amazing work being done by some of the women in computational design. And we are very excited in particular for this year because we've been able to have a speaker who is not regional because we're doing this virtually. And so we've been able to have a phenomenal opportunity to have someone from outside of the area come and join us. So with that, thank you to our sponsor of tonight's event, Microsoft Resources. They have been an amazing supporter of the Dynamo user group over the years and also great supporter of WIA Philadelphia. So we are very glad to have their continued support even as things have gotten a little tighter for everyone this year. So with that, I'm going to hand things off to Dan and we will get started.
Thanks, Ifrey, and thanks to both Ifrey and Jazz for organizing this joint WA PDUG event. If you don't know about PDUG, we are the Philadelphia Dynamo user group. We are a collaborative community for computational designers in the Philadelphia area. We focus primarily on Dynamo and the use of other graphical programming languages like Grasshopper, but we also cover lots of other related technologies, Python, augmented reality, machine learning, computational design in general. If you'd like to learn more about us, see what presentations we've had in the past, please check out our website, pdug.co, or look for us on our YouTube channel. We post almost all of our videos on our YouTube channel. So it's my honor tonight to introduce our guest speaker again. Our guest tonight is Kristen Schulte. Kristen is a digital transformation specialist at Proving Ground. If you're not aware of Proving Ground, they're a leading digital design agency that helps AEC firms transform their digital processes. Kristen is a licensed architect. She holds a Master of Architecture degree from the University of Lincoln, Nebraska. University of Nebraska, Lincoln, excuse me. And Kristen has worked with a variety of different sized firms in her career as an architect, project manager, BIM manager. But her work with Proving Ground has recently focused on automation with popular BIM tools and developing custom software solutions for the building industry. So with that, I'll turn it over to Kristen.
Hi, everybody. Hopefully this will work this time. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So automation partnerships is the theme of my talk tonight. Automation, obviously, you know, getting things done without a lot of user interaction is one of the things I love about it, but also makes it difficult to present is that there's not a whole lot to see. It's not, you know, flashy stuff like some of the things you see about generative design or some of the other things that are in marketing right now about computational design. It's really all kind of behind the scenes. But one of the most compelling things for me about that, the automation that we do, is it's in partnership. So the way we work at Proving Ground is working in partnership with our clients and taking them with us along the way. So one of the things that I get asked a lot, especially, I guess I'll just get my slides to continue here. There we go. Sorry about that. Like Daniel said, my name is Kristen Schulte. I'm licensed in the state of Nebraska because that's where I was living when I finished my AREs. And I'm a digital transformation specialist at Proving Ground. And so, yeah, like one of the things that I get asked a lot, especially from students and young women in that are interested in computational design, is what was my career path? How did I end up at Proving Ground? And a lot of times it seems like they're looking for like a linear answer, like how do I also do this? But my background has been very nonlinear. I grew up in South Dakota, way up there, #1 in the top center of the country. And I moved to Albuquerque, New Mexico for my undergrad at University of New Mexico, and loved it there. It was great. The mountains are wonderful. But life happened. I moved to Oklahoma and South Dakota, and then to Nebraska, kind of all working at different small firms. Other things in life were happening that made me move. But over time, I had a Bachelor of Arts in Architecture degree, and when I left New Mexico, I didn't really know a lot about how buildings were put together, and I found that I really loved that part of it, and so I dug in, worked at a bunch of different small firms. It was about 8 years of working, and by the end of that 8 years, I was the BIM manager of my 7-person firm, and also basically doing everything that an architect does, going to construction sites and overseeing, the construction contract administration piece of things, to early design, kind of the full gamut of a project. And I got to the point where I was like, well, if I don't go back and get my master's, I'm pretty much stuck. This is kind of where I'm going to be, and I don't want to be stuck here forever. I want to actually get paid for doing the things that an architect does. And so I went back to school in Nebraska and got my master's. And while I was there, I took a little class from this guy named Nate Miller. He is our founder and CEO and all the cool titles you get when you start a company. We're a 5-person company, so we're pretty small at Proving Ground, but I took a couple of 1-credit-hour courses. They sounded interesting. One was conceptual modeling in Revit, and the other one was a Dynamo intro. And I even, at that time, I hadn't really heard anything about Dynamo, even though I was the BIM manager of our 7-person team. I was pretty much the only person who could use Revit effectively, is kind of the way that worked. But it was super fascinating to learn about Dynamo and kind of dig in on these things. And so I took these 2 classes in the spring of my first year, and then I did a summer internship with Proving Ground. I've highlighted kind of with the, sorry about the sloppy yellow highlighter. There were 3 interns. We did an 8-week intensive research internship, and the ones that are highlighted are the ones that I worked on. And there's a theme there of pain points with code plans, code analysis and life safety plans and exit capacity, travel path, sightline analysis, that kind of stuff, was what was interesting to me. And during this internship, I was actually introduced to Grasshopper. So I started with Dynamo and then moved to Grasshopper, which was like revelation. It's so much, the community is so much bigger with Grasshopper that the tools are far and away better, unfortunately. So unfortunately for Revit users. But what was super interesting about this internship was the ability to do research, and we did it on a 1 week or maybe 2 weeks at a time. So each one of these items, these I think are still up on a repo, so you can pull them down. But one of the biggest pain points for me with Dynamo as I was doing this is that you finish a solution and then you open it up 2 weeks later and it's broken because something's changed or Dynamo was updated or something. And so it was not very resilient. It was a very brittle process working with Dynamo. And so I quickly was ready to move on and to actually start coding. And I started to learn that when I started at Proving Ground. So Proving Ground was started by Nate Miller as a blog when he was at NBBJ, and it grew into a company kind of over time. Hey, there I am. And we work in a lot of different mediums, but for the most part, it's somehow comes back to the building industry in some way. So we love this comic strip, and I'll give you a second to read it. But the idea is basically the availability of tools alone does not bring about the change we need necessarily. And the other thing about this comic that is sort of important for me to point out is that the idea of somebody kind of going away and going into their corner and working for 6 months on a problem and then coming back and going, oh, I didn't solve it. Like, that's not the way we work. We like to work on much shorter time periods and have a dialogue and say, okay, here's the basic part of what we've talked about. Let's see where we can break it and find where the edge cases are. Excuse me. So our automation partnerships for digital workflow. Digital workflow for us is pretty broad. Pretty much any way that you're using the computer to get your work done would be a digital workflow. And for us, it's about removing those pain points or speeding things up or streamlining them whenever possible. Right. So strategic focus on broad applications of digital, create tools for any skill level, and grow the skills to manage data. So one of the things that design BIM users are not necessarily great at is being consistent in the way they put the I in BIM, the information in there. So then you end up, you kind of have a little bit of a garbage in, garbage out problem with the data not being consistent or usable. So managing data is a skill that sometimes needs to be introduced as a new concept. But the main outcomes or ideas for doing the automation is to either one or all three of these, depending, one or two or all three, reduce friction, integrate the data, and enable insight. So the first one, the first automation partnership example I want to talk about is all about reducing friction. So we worked with HED. They're a multidisciplinary firm. You guys may not be familiar with them. I believe they're based out of Chicago as their main office. At least our contacts are based out of Chicago. So they're, like I said, they're a multidisciplinary firm. They wanted to create a tool to do start a new Revit project, multi-model project. They wanted to make sure you do that to make sure that people were following firm standards, using minimal upfront information. And the idea of the outcome is that it's a framework, that what we end up with at the end is ready for the designers, architects and engineers to sort of add the building, add the stuff, but that the framework is there. So things like levels, sheets, views, all that kind of stuff is set up. If you're going to do a multi-sector plan, the sectors are set up, that kind of thing. So It's kind of a how it started versus how it's going. So we started, I think in 2018 on this project, and it started out pretty simple, things like levels and views and sheets, like I said, and there were two main components. There's the database. I don't know if you guys can see my pointer, but the database and the tool, they talk to each other. So pretty basic. The tool has this super simple interface that just tells you like, hey, I'm doing stuff, and this is the one I'm doing. Not real sophisticated. It still right now looks like that, but how it's going is that it's getting really integrated into their system. And so we have, initially it only did, saved it on a local machine. So we had, here's our database, the data from a survey. The survey is like, what's the project name? How many levels should there be? Should there be sectors or not? Should there be architecture, mechanical, electrical, structural, plumbing, landscape, all of those disciplines, how many of those disciplines should be included in this particular project? Those kinds of things. And so here was our tool, the Revit task worker, and there was our survey data, and that's all we had initially. And now we're getting to where, so we've been through major and minor updates. So we started with a V1, and then we had a V1.5 or 1.2 or whatever you want to call it. And then we moved into a V2, which incorporated some of these things. Now we're looking ahead to a V3, which would include a much more robust user interface, which I'll show you in a second, and a better way of dealing with global settings, things like what is the naming convention for the new views that it's creating or the new sheets that it's creating, things like that. We use a seed model process where there's not a template so much as a model, a project that has all the main things to get started in it. So we call that a seed model because it's more robust than a template. And that's stored locally with the Revit task worker, but it can connect to BIM 360. It can connect to Revit server. And Clarity is a tool developed in Minnesota. I don't know if you guys have used it or heard of it, but it's another tool that they use in their system. And so we've had to connect to a couple of APIs for that. So the BIM 360 created the whole Forge API is kind of a monster, but if you squint your eyes just right, you can get it to make a new project and add the folders you want and all that stuff. And then Clarity can listen to either the BIM 360 project location or the Revit server model location and help deal with that. They use that in HED. So you can use we use their API to create a new Clarity project as well. All of that kind of coming together, but we still have this kind of boring user interface, just kind of living on a VM. And the global settings are just a series of CSV files, which are kind of a monster to maintain. And so we're looking to get into a true web-based interface that can tell you without having to log into that virtual machine what it's doing, where it's at, some more detailed kind of log information. And then the settings is the main thing of like starting to set naming conventions. This example is for a sheet. So every single sort of character of that sheet's number and the sheet name, how that should be assembled. So what it's doing is it's running through, if there's 15 levels in this project based on the survey, it'll run through and make for a floor plan, it'll make, well, so it's got one by default, so it'll make the other 14, and the ceiling plan, it'll make the other 14. And so it's running through, it's doing this process that used to take their BIM managers hours or maybe days, depending on the project, and it does it in about an hour. Some of the smaller ones are like 15 minutes, but it runs through that process and does that kind of the boring stuff, really. I mean, nobody cares about what the sheet number is until they go to print it like 6 months later or whatever. But so this whole process kind of make that much easier. And the other thing that has been a pain point that we've discovered along the way is using the CSV files and the seed model, certain specific things, if the name that's in the CSV file doesn't match exactly to what it is in the seed model, it will break things. So if it's looking for a specific view template and it can't find it, then it just kind of gives up and uses the default kind of thing. And so it's not super visible here, but there's a seed data section on settings. And I'll talk a little bit more about our model data harvesting in the next examples, but that would get incorporated as well. So we'd run through and pull the relevant information from the seed model and then be able to use that here in this interface to select from the options rather than having to type it precisely the same. So it's taking a fairly basic idea that initially was very time saving, but there's all these kind of like, well, that's great, but can it also, and can it also, and can it also, and that's built and built to the point where we have this kind of crazy network of stuff happening. And so now it's, can we make it more usable? And that's where we're headed with that one. So these other two both are pretty similar to each other. And the main two ideas with them is to integrate data and to enable insight. Excuse me. They kind of go hand in hand, those two ideas, but the integrating data is somewhat necessary for enabling insight. So our typical working fashion is to constantly be on the next project and the next project. And a lot of times you have one team that gets all the way through the project and then they go on to their next project and they get split into different teams, or you have people working on multiple teams. But you never have, or you rarely have time to really reflect on what you learned from the previous project before you dive into the next one. And so what we wanted to bring in with this, with data, is this idea of benchmarking. So you can have a feedback loop and learn some things from the previous projects to apply to the next ones. Or maybe even as you go along, start to learn from the things that you're doing and find, maybe find issues earlier, or at least be aware that, hey, this needs to be resolved. One of our earliest versions of this is something called Minecart. You guys may have heard of it. It was one of our first sort of super popular things that initially we didn't do products. We do some products now, but this was one that people wanted as somewhat of a product rather than a customization. Basically what it does, in this version, you open it in Revit and you can harvest to a database all of the data or some of the data from your Revit model. And so the way we organize that database, you can look across an organization at projects, multiple models within those projects. Within your Revit models, you have elements, and within each element, there's a series of parameters, right? So each table within the database, they're related to each other. It's a relational database, but you get down to the level of a parameter. So when you start to build queries within the database, you can start to create lists of the things that you care about. In this case, this one is about rooms. So you get the different department, the different parameters, department, name, number, etc. Excuse me, by element within a project or within a model. And once we organize it that way, we can start to do data insights, start to see things across projects, across models within a project, even across different organizations when we're talking about doing work for building owners that work with multiple architects, start to see things and be able to filter things, start to see trends. We customize those things. This is a custom one we did for a co-working group that wanted to look across their portfolio. The first major partnership that I want to talk about within kind of a minecart context, this data context, was a building owner, retail owner that had a lot of facilities in their portfolio. They were not Revit users, really. They had a few Revit users, but they didn't want to have to deal with Revit to get the information that they wanted out of their digital assets. So when we are doing our data mining, we want to get what's important, present the building information in an accessible format, feed into their existing processes, which was a lot of it Excel based, and do that by eliminating some manual steps where they would literally just look at a floor plan and count things and then enter it into Excel like it was that manual. And then the ideal eventually is to inform future projects, new build, but they do a lot of renovations of different departments within their retail space. And so a lot of what they are interested in is renovation, partial sort of chunk renovation. Here's sort of our proving ground branded version, because I can't show the one we actually created for them. It was branded for them, but it's similar to the HUD one in that you can see what's happening. But in this case, they had dozens of architects that they're working with, and they want to assign them a login where they can log in and upload the models. They don't ever have to even touch the Revit models, and we can get the data out that they care about at various stages along the way for any given project. Architecture, not just architects, but engineering as well, for all their different teams, dozens of teams on different projects. And so we're getting to that kind of dashboard final process with them, but the dashboards are in some ways just a retranslation of the Excel file, the Excel tables that they were using, so they're not very visually interesting anyway, even if I could show them. But the idea is that we took that little add-in that lived in Revit and now have made it an online portal where you can upload your Revit models, and then it sends the instructions over to a virtual machine, and the virtual machine churns on it and spits the data up into a database, and no one ever has to touch it. You don't see anything until it fails, which it does occasionally, but usually not. Usually it's because the virtual machine got logged out of Revit magically somehow, because Revit is not built for doing things automatically, which is unfortunate. Our third and final one that I want to share, partnership, was with HDR. This one was a little while ago, so I've actually presented on this project before in partnership with Rachel Riopel that is at HDR. She was in a different position than she is now at the time, but we worked together on this, and we presented it at AIA Minnesota a little over a year ago. But again, they wanted to get what's important, present. So with HDR, mega large firm, right? So they wanted to present building information across the firm portfolio, and then potentially enable development of a new data-driven service offering. So the idea that they have such a big portfolio, they start to see trends in the industry, they can offer that as a service to their clients. So to take advantage of untapped data. There we go. Excuse me. So this is one of our early diagrams of this process, and we started to identify how the feedback loop would ideally work, and the magenta items are things that they did not yet have in their system. So they had Revit DROFIS, they were using IFC, sometimes, not super often, and Power BI and Tableau, sometimes, not super often, Excel. So bringing sort of a customized version of our minecart into this, but also creating a custom add-in for Revit that would help their users be more consistent about data. Like I mentioned earlier, designers are not necessarily thinking about the quality of the data that they enter, or what it means beyond what it looks like on the sheet. And so it definitely wouldn't be cross-portfolio. Here's an example of that. Super simple, right? You just want to look at area. We had 5 healthcare projects, and we used OmniClass to classify building gross square foot, department gross square foot, building net square foot, and department net square foot. And somehow this data was kind of all over the map, even in this 5 model sort of proof of concept that we did early on with them. You can kind of see with the ribbons, especially here, that they're just like this one didn't have anything that was classified as department gross square foot. Don't know why. And this one had a whole bunch of stuff that probably didn't actually belong there in department gross square foot. So the idea of sort of cleaning up the data automatically, there's kind of 2 ways of thinking about that. There's this sort of relatively simple version of setting up a kind of a decision tree where you have a room, it's named patient room. It has no department. Where do you put it? I don't know. So a couple of options of like, we don't recognize the department NICU West Wing, but we recognize that it's NICU. Maybe we can rename it to NICU in more generally. So it's things like that where people enter things that mean something on the sheet, but become kind of a mess for the computer to deal with, right? Because it doesn't know that NICU-West Wing is a more specific version of NICU necessarily, unless you tell it explicitly. And again, because we were working with such a large data set with all of the portfolio that HDR has, we could start thinking about machine learning and AI and start using something like maybe a neural net to start to predict things that were misnamed or unclearly named, what those actually should be. And we did some tests with that, and Nate and Dave Stasik presented that paper, I don't remember, maybe a year ago, talking about this, but at that point we still only had a fairly small data set, so it wasn't super successful. So we'd like to continue building that data set and really test that out. But the thing that people, it highlights one of the things that people don't often think about with machine learning is that it's not just like a magic box. Like, you have to give it data to teach it. You have to teach the machine first before it can learn anything. And so you need enough good data to work with. And that's a major problem in our industry, is having enough good data that's useful to the machine. So again, here's another visualization of that same project. So that's sort of 3 examples of partnerships that I have worked closely with. We have a lot of other partnerships. I haven't worked necessarily closely with all of these. Even though there's only 5 of us, we do split up our expertise. And so it's been a ton of fun working on the ones that I do work on and hearing about the ones that I haven't worked on. Here's some of the more beautiful things. These 4 all had some relationship to the product that is now Conveyor, to take Rhino data into Revit. Here's the list of our tools. Some of these are products, some of them are free. Lunchbox, the Dynamo users should recognize, hopefully, Lunchbox. That was one of Nate's greatest hits, I guess we'll say. So Lunchbox actually has a machine learning component to it as well now. There's a Lunchbox ML. I believe you have to download it separately. But yeah, you can start to dig into the machine learning tools, and there was a recent update on that for the Grasshopper tools on machine learning. But I'll talk just briefly about the ones that are apps that you can just go buy. Conveyor, Semantic, and Tracer. Let's see, we'll get, I think, a video here. Conveyor, come on, Conveyor. There we go. So on the left, you'll see the Rhino models, and on the right, you see them translated beautifully to Revit. This is Nate's baby. I don't necessarily work with it super often, but I did use it on one of those projects I showed you earlier with the sexy curves, sexy blob curves. I helped early on when I first started at Proving Ground translate the landscape, because the architects were frustrated with the landscape architects, and so I did it. It was fun, but it was sort of a series of Grasshopper tools at the time, for the most part, and now it's a tool that is available to you in Revit, and you can pull things in and go back and deal with changes, and it's a pretty robust, it's a really robust tool. It's a lot more robust than it was when I was using it. It's pretty great. Semantic kind of goes in hand with that, where you want to put some data in early in a Rhino context, in an earlier design, or in sort of a higher view beyond just like one building. You can add some, with Semantic, you can add data to your Rhino objects, and then Conveyor will help you translate those over to Revit when you're ready. Tracer is a way to export things both from Rhino and Revit back into one of our favorite tools, Power BI, for dashboards. So there's the floor plan tool, and there's coming up is the 3D version of that floor plan tool. Sorry about that. Thought I had one more slide. I'm not sure if it's released yet, but that's Trippy's baby. So hopefully soon, if it's not out yet or already. So here's some fun things that we've done. I'm excited to hear in the Q&A what things you guys would like automated. What are your pain points in your work? Or, you know, of course, any questions you have for me on any of the projects that I've shown you. Yeah, I'm ready to open it up for Q&A.
Great, Kristen, thank you so much. It was really interesting getting to see how all of that works, and in particular, working at a firm that does a lot of heavy Revit use and has been trying to leverage that I in BIM.
Yeah.
It's really interesting seeing how you guys have helped firms figure that one out.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so for everyone currently attending, you now should have the ability to unmute yourself if you would like to ask a question. Otherwise, feel free to submit the question through the chat, or I think at this point we are a small enough group. Don't worry about raising your hand. Feel free to just voice your question if you have one. Yeah, Ariel.
Hey, I'm a big fan of Proving Ground, so thank you so much for presenting. I am actually wondering if you had any insight on how to find the we in BIM. I found that a lot of architecture firms, sometimes you have one person who's always done something this way, and somebody wants to try something new, and you know, then you have like a third person who's like, oh, well, I do it in a different way. So how do you work with firms, or do you, to kind of bring them together and, you know, do one thing, get on the same page? Any advice for that?
Same page as far as like sort of standards of like following a standard. Is that kind of what you mean? I don't personally, Steve and Nate at Proving Ground do more of that kind of early strategy stuff on figuring out like, kind of, do you really need our help? And if so, like, do you need the help that you think you do? And some of those things that you just asked about are some of the things that are like, okay, that I know you want to do this cool thing, but like first we need to get back to like, can we be all on the same page, right? Because if everybody's, again, really like the information part of it, the data part of it, if everybody's doing their own thing and following their own standard, or using a different method, you kind of have a garbagey mess by the end of, like, if you're trying to look at across the last 5 projects that you did in housing and everybody's doing it completely differently, you can't even compare them. You don't even have apples and oranges. You have like apples and watermelons. Like it's just a mess, right? And so we don't do BIM training so much. So we typically try to help point people in directions of like whoever their Autodesk reseller is in their area, and some like specific questions to ask them for like specific kinds of training, or like facilitating a discussion about why are we not on the same page and what do we need to do to get there. But yeah, sometimes it just takes an outsider's point of view of being like, you guys are being crazy, stop being crazy. But no, we don't necessarily get into like the nitty gritty of actually making that happen. But we do, when we do strategies, kind of point some of those things out. And sometimes all it takes is pointing it up to the leadership to make things happen. So we can do that.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hey, I think we have time for probably one more question. So if you are sitting on your question, waiting to see if someone else is going to ask it, now would be the time to do it, because we're only going to be able to take one more.
If there's no other questions, I have one, actually kind of two related questions. You know, for all of these development tools that you've done, can you just talk a little bit about how you learned how to do all those things, and, you know, getting into some of these different bits of coding or using, you know, some of these other tools, Power BI and things like that? Can you just talk about the process of learning those just in a general sense?
Yeah, peer-to-peer training, pretty much. I mean, I don't know. I did my undergrad way back in like 2004, and back then we were teaching each other how to use AutoCAD, because there wasn't like a class, and so that same spirit has carried completely through. Like, I learned the basics of Dynamo in that 1 credit hour class from Nate, but then through through that internship, we taught each other different things. We did some workshops where people, I think it was pretty much just Nate and Dave at that point, at Proving Ground, that were full-time employees. They did some presentations our first week on like, this is how Grasshopper works, and this is how Dynamo works, for those of you who haven't tried that. And then we were just kind of thrown to the wolves and go pick a research topic and make it happen. And so, of course, we could ask them questions throughout. And Slack is a huge thing for us. We do a lot of Slack chatting about things, or like, okay, this is too long to type, I'm gonna call you on Zoom. But or, you know, when we were in person, I'm just gonna ask you because you're sitting right next to me, but that doesn't happen with us anymore. We went fully remote about a month before the pandemic started, so it was kind of a weird coincidence. But yeah, Dave taught me how to code. I remember learning the concept of a class. It was very difficult for me. I was like, what? But we do a lot of looking at forums when you're talking about the Revit API, the building coder, that Jeremy Tamek's blog has been huge. But a lot of the same concepts, like I was looking at that blog to figure out how to do something in Dynamo, because it's the same underlying concept. Like Dynamo uses a Revit API. So whether you're telling it to do it through the little blocks, or whether you're telling it to do it by typing out C# code, the concept is the same. It's still using the same piece of the Revit API. So it wasn't too bad of a transition, except for the whole, like, how do I organize my project in Visual Studio? That was a whole fresh concept. But yeah, again, peer-to-peer, or hunting online, or like asking friends. I'm not an expert, I would say, but we figure it out. So I don't feel like an expert, I guess, because of the way I've learned.
I know, at least in my experience, that seems to be the majority of us in AEC working in computation. None of us really feel like we're experts, because we all came at it through a very non-traditional pathway.
Yeah.
So I know I said we were only going to have the one more question, but I want to give you the chance to pitch your firm if you'd like to. Someone did ask through the chat, in general, the services that you offer, how does the pricing work out if someone wanted to hire you? Are you generally only within the financial range of these really large firms, or you know, would it be affordable for a smaller firm?
For the most part, the super custom stuff, like the example of HEDs that work, the big partnerships that I've worked on, they are probably out of the range of a larger firm or of a smaller firm. But that's one of the reasons we started trying to do the products, the conveyor, the semantic, the tracer, because the small firms are close to my heart. I think the largest firm I ever worked at in a traditional sense was about 30 people. And so the kind of scrappy having your fingers in all of it was big for me when I was doing that stuff. So that push, like if there's an idea that has broad appeal, we might just take it and run with it and then release it as a product at some point. But if you're talking about engaging us for something custom, it just depends on how long the engagement is. But we have done quite a few, we call it a proof of concept process, where you have an idea and you want to just kind of prove it out. We can do a proof of concept in a short kind of 2-week rigorous, like we're not going to deal with every edge case possible, but we're going to get the core of it and see if it works. I think those typically run around $10,000 with us. And it's basically that and up for an engagement with us for a custom thing.
Great. Again, thank you so much. If anyone is interested in sharing the work that Kristen shared with us, I know they have a great repo on GitHub. You can download a lot of their tools for Grasshopper from Food for Rhino, or through the package manager for Dynamo. And there's lots of great documentation and support for them online. And they're very, very popular in especially the Grasshopper forums. So you can always find someone who wants to talk about them. Thank you all for, yeah, oh, sorry, go ahead.
You mentioned the package manager. I just wanted to note that the latest versions are on our website. There were issues with package manager. They were resolved, but we just better to leave it on our website. So
it's always good to be able to retain some control over your own things. So yeah, please feel free to engage in them that way. If you want to be able to share this presentation with friends or internally within your organization, I know the Dynamo user group will be posting it to their channel once we get the recording from the AIA. So keep an eye out for that on their YouTube channel, and you can share this away. Thank you again to everyone for joining us. If you want to join the WIA this Friday, we have our final Coffee and Connect of 2020 happening Friday morning, and then we won't be back again for another event until the end of January. So we would love to see you there. Dan, I don't know if you have an upcoming event you want to pitch before we let everybody go?
We're working on scheduling something with the Philadelphia Emerging Architects group with the AIA to do one of the first events in their digital demos series. So we're looking to schedule that sometime towards the end of January or in February.
Great, so keep an eye out for that. You can find us on both organizations on all of our social media channels. Thanks again. Have a great evening. For those of you in Philadelphia, stay warm and dry. And we hope to see you again soon. Take care, everyone.
Thanks.